Okay, the first technique that we're going to discuss is proportional symbols maps. And what we'll look at is how this technique is created um, and some of the strengths and weaknesses of using this technique to present data. Okay, so the first key characteristic of this technique is obviously it is where you draw a symbol on a map and the size of that symbol directly relates to the amount being represented for that particular piece of data. So for example, here we can see traffic fatalities, and we can see that in California and Texas, we have a large symbol indicating a high volume of traffic fatalities, and we would just have to match up that with the key. Okay, it's a highly visual technique, as you can see, so you can use the symbol to actually represent what the data is about, as we can see in this particular map over here. And that's one of the main advantages. I'll come back to that later. So what else does this technique allow you to do? Well, it allows you to place your data, in this case the pie chart, connected to where it's come from. So I can now connect the population size of Brazil to Brazil because it's located on the map. And because I've got other proportional symbols for other countries, like Paraguay down here, I can compare them with each other because the size of the circle represents the actual population size of the country. So it allows for relatively easy comparison. Another positive aspect is most of the time, assuming your symbols aren't too big, you can actually place them on the actual location where the data came from. So we can see that the data here for California is placed in California. Likewise, the data for Texas is placed in Texas. What you can further do with your proportional symbols is you can treat them a bit like pie charts. So we can see here that we don't just have Brazil's population being the largest in South America, but we can divide it into 3 segments and then connect those segments with the key. So I can see that 2/3 of Brazil's population are in the 15 to 64 age bracket that we can see there. So it allows me to present 2 pieces of data using the same data present technique. Okay. Now, what are the strengths of using this technique? Well, first and foremost, it's highly visual. As we can see in this example here, it allows you to choose your symbol to represent your data and then present it, which would capture the attention of the person looking at the data. Second thing, it allows you to place data in the actual location where it's gathered from, so we can see a pattern emerge. So if, for example, we can clearly see that there is a cluster of states in the middle part of the US with higher values compared to this Midwestern region with much lower levels. And we can very clearly see the 2 highest levels jumping out on our map, clearly ahead of all the others. So patterns become really easy to identify. It's relatively easy to create as a technique. It's not difficult. When you compare it to some of the other techniques we'll be exploring, it's quite easy to draw a symbol and make it bigger or smaller. It can be, and these are the problems, or one of the main problems, is that it can be quite difficult to see exactly the amount of data. So here we clearly see that we've got a skull and crossbones that is much larger than the highest value in the key. So we're not sure exactly the amount. We can see, for example, that this state here is the symbol there is bigger than here on the key, but smaller than this one on the key. So which piece of exact amount is difficult to discern. We can't find out the exact amount for that value. Some of the other techniques actually provide you with an exact amount of data. Okay, probably the biggest criticism is shown here with proportional symbols. That whilst each symbol is perfectly sitting over where the data has come from, when we have very large symbols like here, and then smaller bits of data, for example here, then the larger symbol ends up covering this smaller symbol. And in this piece of Central Europe here, it's just become a mess of symbols, larger symbols overlapping smaller symbols, and becomes impossible to actually determine the values and where they belong. Okay, so that is a quick introduction to how to create the actual technique, what its advantages are, and what its disadvantages are.